Hey everybody, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard. It is Dan, and I have an exciting show for you today. One of the issues that men often have brought up to me, especially recently, is they're struggling with what it means to be a man and really how to define not only themselves but masculinity in general. And recently, the author of the book Song of the Hero, a book for men to develop redemptive and heroic relationship skills, reached out to me and sent me a copy of his book, which was one of the best books I've ever read. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about the particulars in his book and share with you all some thoughts on it as I was reading it, because this is a game changer, guys. It really is. It's something that I was actually conversing back and forth with Ed, who is the author, as I was reading it a little bit, setting this all up and sharing with him just how wonderful I thought the book was. Enough about that. Let me bring my good friend, my partner in crime for this podcast, Ed Nissen. Ed, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So sorry I butchered the name on the book. It'll be really cool when I put up this graphic for it, but that's what happens. I told you off air. I butcher things. So Ed, I mean, fantastic book. We're going to get into the nitty gritty on it, but before we do that, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, typically I would just go into what I do for a living, but I think it's more appropriate to say, and especially for this podcast, that I'm a married man. I've been married for 15 years, been together with my wife for 17 years, and we have a 13-year-old daughter. Uh, Family is the thing that I value most. I'm not sure which is my favorite out of the two, being a husband or a father, but they're at least neck and neck. So that's first and foremost what I would say is defines who I am. Outside of that, I'm a son, I'm a friend, brother, and all of those things. Professionally, though, psychotherapist for about 10 years now, and I have a psychotherapy practice in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. I guess for about 9, 10 years now, I've had the practice, and many interests come with that, and part of this sort of convergence of my personal journey, along with sort of my clinical experience and a lot of the clients that I would get, and being a man in the psychotherapy world was sort of a minority. So you tend to get a lot of male clients. And so the sort of convergence of my own personal experience as a man in a marriage converge with a lot of the life problems that a lot of these guys were bringing to me as a psychotherapist. And so it led to this pretty deep curiosity and interest in what I would say is male psychological development within the context of marriage or long-term relationships.
One thing, not to get too far out in the weeds on this, but one thing that I've noticed, Ed, is the dearth of male mental professionals, mental health professionals in general, and I'm seeing that this is, I think, one of the struggles that men are having is finding someone that they can relate to. Um, just some quick, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on it, but just some quick thoughts on that is, I mean, are you finding that as well from the other side? That because last I saw, something like 90% of the new graduates coming out are women. And we both know there is a huge mental health issue for both men and women. But for the men, they're really struggling. Just any quick thoughts on that?
I have many, but I have to,
Yeah, we could do a whole
think about what I'm
podcast on
gonna.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if one of the things I'm interested in is personality psychology, and you can really understand groups of people by personality, and part of that is, I adhere to the Big Five personality model. One of the traits is agreeableness, and generally speaking, across the board, women are higher in agreeableness than men. Men tend to be more disagreeable. The mental health field, therapy, it's by nature a very agreeable field because you're negotiating for other people's needs, you're tending to other people's needs. So it's this very compassionate sort of field. Oddly enough, based on my personality, I don't fit the sort of profile of a typical therapist, which I actually think lends to I don't know, I would say my success, but a lot of success with the male clients because I can be so direct. But so I think that's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest factors. of why that is, and then we can get into maybe a little political here, but academia as a whole, it seems to be it's getting more and more heavily dominated by women. So just a couple of
Yeah.
things that come to mind.
I mean, that's again, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But it's interesting because I hear so much from men lately, and I've done a couple videos recently talking about the mental health issue, and as we were talking off air, I get hundreds of emails and messages a day, and one of the things that is most striking to me is because that I can help guys. I do some coaching on the side, but I am not a mental health professional. I don't claim to be one. I don't cross that line in any way. But trying to help guys find someone that can work for them, because it's a unique relationship, not unlike a marriage, right? Where your communication, like in marriage, is a key thing, and it's a real struggle for guys. But again, that's a whole other podcast. I just thought I would add my 2 cents on that. But let's dive into the book. So I want to make sure I say it again and say it right. Song for Hero, a book for men to develop redemptive and heroic relationship skills, which, as I said, I thought was fantastic. Let me ask you this, Ed. What prompted you to write the book? And I guess the second part of that is why did you choose to frame the relationship development part of it as a heroic journey?
Yeah, big question.
Yeah, big one.
Uh, well, part of it, I guess I could say it's the book that I needed personally that I could not find or was not out there. Maybe sound a little cliche, but it's true. So part of this, long story short here is that I needed to step into my leadership as a husband in a way that was lacking in my marriage, and my wife made that very known to me. And so I had this awareness that I needed to do that it was not being the man that I could be in my marriage. So I sort of, undertook this transformative journey. And within that, and it really had nothing to do with what I understood as a psychotherapist and the psychology that I understood at that point. So you could say that my journey was a bit unconventional. Even some of the resources I encountered could be considered controversial. Not too bad, but So within that, it's this sort of unconventional path in the sense that if I were to take that and make some recommendations to my male clients who are experiencing their own life problems as a man in a marriage, say, that would not fit into what we call evidence-based practice. So as a psychotherapist, we have to operate within the bounds of evidence-based practice. And the path that I took was, not at least not to my knowledge, really within the bounds of that, because I would see it work for me. I was really experiencing a transformation. And of course, you have something and you want to share it. If I have a good steak, it's like I want you to have it too because I want you to know what a good steak tastes like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really had to figure out how to sort of introduce the concepts that had been working for me within my therapy practice and a lot of the guys that I was seeing. So I just started doing some research on what scientific research and theories and models out there supported the concepts that I was taking in this unconventional path, if you will. And I started to find that. So then I was able to sort of apply this in therapy with these guys, and it started to work. And so I said, okay, well, there's something here. I need to just start taking some notes. Um, Notes turned to a few pages. I thought that I might create a sort of enhancement model for therapy. And about 30 or 50 pages later, I realized that I was writing a book, and could say the rest is history, but there's a whole lot of history there too.
Well, it's as someone who's written books myself, that's kind of how it happens for me a few times. Is I'll start writing a discourse on a particular subject. The next thing I know, I've got, like you, 40, 50 pages, and then take it from there. One of the big takeaways, I'm giving away the ending, I guess, in a manner of speaking, that I had from this, and you said it pretty early in the book, is that it really did change your marriage, change your relationship with your wife. Can you share with the audience a little bit about what that was like as you were writing the book, like you kind of just hinted at, you had some revelations and stuff like that. What was that experience like? Because I'm curious myself.
Painful.
Painful. Okay.
Um, you know, and I didn't really write this in the preface, um, but I would say it took me about 3.5 years to write the rough draft, and then maybe another year, a little more to go through the editing process and ultimately get it published. And I look at it as sort of a dissertation. I had an idea, I had a theory, a hypothesis in mind. I knew that something was worth sort of this research, and so I call it a dissertation because um, when I started this project of this book, looking back, I probably knew about 10% of what I knew after I wrote the book, and so you learn so much because of the research you had to do. Um, but the process was also painful because it's you know if you just take, and I'm not saying there's not any value to this, but if you're just curious from the outside of oh, here's something that might be interesting, I can learn how to, I can do some research and find out everything I need to know to write such a book. But if you don't really have the personal experiences and the struggles um, to sort of pour into that book, then it's like you just know that it's not going to have the essence that you need, the depth behind the book. Because you can read a book and tell if I think you can. I think you can read a book and tell if someone is just writing because they think it's interesting and it's a cool topic, or if it's something that they have a lot of experience in, for better or worse, and it's something meaningful for them that they want to do. But the thing that I didn't share is maybe about a year into writing this thing, my marriage was not doing very well at all, which is interesting because, like I said before, I had this realization that I was not being the man that I could be, and I began this transformative journey. Started to see things improve, which ended up, with me being able to implement some of these things with a lot of my male clients, and it was working for them. And then it's like my marriage is really, really questionable at this point. So, like a lot of people who write books that also have to do with their own personal experiences, they go through this process at some point where it's like, who am I to write this book? If I'm writing this thing to help men, but here I am struggling and can't figure anything out myself. But I think most people would say it's like, well, that actually can lend to the the value, the utility of such a book. And so, happy ending here. My marriage is better than ever, and it's not like we were on the way to court or anything like that for divorce, but nonetheless, there was this deep struggle, and I think it's important to put out there in the sense that if anybody knows the struggle of marriage, who's written a book like this, it's me, and then lots of other guys. Um, so I could probably go on and on and on, but I'll give you a chance to
No, I
bring
mean,
in some more.
I'm actually fascinated by this because I think you're bringing a unique perspective to what your journey was like, and I'm sure it affected your wife as well as you were writing the book because as you said, your relationship improved. But also, you also have the ability as a mental health professional to kind of have that in your thought process as well. And there's this misnomer out there, I think, that a lot of people don't understand, that mental health professionals are human beings, for lack of a better term, and you go through the very same things we do. I've had guys to say that they don't know what it's like to have to go through a divorce, and I'm like, oh, but they do. In fact, I've heard, and I don't know if it's still true, but in the past I've heard mental health professionals, their divorce rate's a little bit higher than the norm, and for whatever reason. But it's interesting to me to hear that you benefited as much from writing this book as anyone who might read it, and that's important. And I think it comes through the pages, like you were kind of talking about it, right? As I was reading the book, and again, I'm relating this to my prior divorces. There's a few instances here and there, and I'm like, crap, if I'd have known that or done that, who knows, right? And I have a happy, healthy marriage now myself, so it's all great. But I was pulling little nuggets out of it as I was going along and understanding and relating to prior failed marriages on how I could have done better, right? One of the issues that I often hear from both sides is there's a lot of the blame game, right? And I know you deal with this all the time. And my viewpoint, and you can certainly correct me, it's 50-50 pretty much all the time, right? There's stop with the blame game, I guess is what I'm saying, right? Nobody's perfect. There's no perfect wife, no perfect husband. We are human beings. We all have our idiosyncrasies and all that stuff. And if we just accept that, I think that's the biggest issue that people face is they don't accept that. But and you can disagree with me on that. But it goes into what I want to kind of start with the book is how do you relay all that in terms of making it about what it is, defining what it is to be a man, how the relationship, you talk about the heroic journey and all of that. Can you kind of give an overview on that and kind of put in what I was just talking about in some ways?
Yeah, there's so much to that, and I also want to say, with the sort of experience of struggling within my own marriage and succeeding in that as well, and how that can lend to the depth and value of such a book as the one that I wrote, is that it reminds me of Carl Jung, which is my favorite psychologist, and certainly one of the most influential people, not just in psychology but the world, although most people don't realize that. But I digress. Is that there's a couple of things he said, and one was, the patient can only go as far as the doctor, and another is only the wounded physician can heal, and for lots of reasons, those things have really stuck with me over the years, and probably was, one of the many things that helped me in when I was struggling and writing this book. So it's really something to have someone who has been through what you've been through, at least on a conceptual level,
Mm-hmm.
if not the specific details of your situation, because you just can't dismiss the credibility, and you can't. You also can't dismiss it when someone doesn't have their credibility, so to speak. So there's that. Um, so with the idea of men and masculinity in this world, and what I would say is in the modern world, uh, that's I can probably write 1,000-page book on what masculinity is, but also I would just be rewriting what a lot of incredibly deep thinkers in the past have already written. And so I say that because I've really taken a deep dive into not just philosophy, but primarily a lot of psychology, but some of the older psychology. Some of these guys back in the day, Carl Jung, Eric Neumann, who wrote an incredible book called The Great Mother, which has been one of the most influential books in my life. These are incredibly deep and dense, very technical books about something that seems and is very abstract and obscure and complex. But these guys really had some things figured out, and so I won't get too far in the weeds in that. Um, but ultimately, it's well, how can you even answer the question of what is masculinity, what is a man, and sort of what do we do with that? Is that I think you have to understand more of the base psychology of the human story, and part of that is in our development. And we have childhood development, adolescent development, cognitive development, but there's psychological development that continues throughout the lifetime, and you could say spiritual development. But the way that, and maybe the psychology that I adhere to, and so I'm not going to say this is the only way or the best way, but it's the one that I adhere to most. It really has to do with conscious development. And essentially, what that is sort of about becoming your own hero. Because the hero sort of, well, fights the dragon. Well, what does a dragon represent? Well, it depends. But obviously, it's something that is dangerous and frightening and dark and scary, but also the notion that it contains something worthwhile to fight for,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the gold. It's the knight who slays the dragon and gets the young virgin or whatever. But essentially, that it's like, what is the thing that I need to face and take on and slay, and what is the reward? What is the goodness that comes out of that? So on an individual level, we go through this sort of inner battle as we sort of exist in reality in the external world. But what are the things that I have to fight? And we, we take on new endeavors,
Mm-hmm.
new challenges, and obviously when we have any success and accomplishments with those, it's a positive feeling, and maybe we walk away with a little more confidence in life, a little more direction. But fundamentally, with the psychology behind this, it's about becoming the hero who can face and slay the dragon and retrieve what's most valuable. And what's most valuable is sort of our own development in a sense of bringing out those aspects of us that merely lie in potential and allowing them to manifest to become more integrated, a more wholesome person. And some of us do it better than others, but it's something we all struggle with. Then you take that concept and then it's like, okay, well, where's the stage on which this plays out? Because all of this psychological development has to play out in the real world. Well, where does that play out at or in? It's in relationships. And you could say that marriage has the most implications, uh, more than any other relationship, on our development and by nature, the other person's development too. So now you have two people, and it's like, all right, so what are we doing here? It's like we're going to have some challenges, we're going to have conflict, and we have to learn how to get along. And ideally, we're going to commit to a life together, which means we're going to have to figure out some things, and we're going to figure out how to manage conflict. But in that, as we well know, any successful long-term relationship or marriage, people will start to say how the other has sort of rounded them out and broadened them and made them a better person and helped them grow and develop. Um, but when you get into the challenges of those, and say for men, it's like, well, when you're married or in a long-term relationship, you're going to have these challenges, and how we manage those challenges, and if we try to manage them at all, because you could just outright avoid them, and good luck, we know what happens to those guys.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's that those are the very things that sort of that activate that process of the heroic fight of the dragon, so to speak, of developing the hero so that you can fight and slay the dragon. And then, so what does it mean to be a man? Is to take on that challenge in relation to the feminine, with ideally here the woman, right? And so it's just like there's this myth that's being played out in this seemingly, by all appearances, this superficial relationship that, and I'm not saying it doesn't hold meaning, but there's this challenge, and that's where we start to figure out where a man is. So I'm not giving you this direct answer of what is a man in modern times, but I would say, the modern man who takes on that challenge courageously and willingly is a man who becomes integrated
Mm-hmm.
and can hold all the opposing aspects of himself, for better or worse, and transcend that into someone who's more wholesome, who's warm but strong and fierce, and knows when to unsheath the sword, and is protective and also charming, and can hold the place for the feminine. And we can get into all the terminology and things that a lot of really good guys who understand this have already said 100 times. But so I'll stop there because I can
No, it's fast.
go about two
It's
hours on that.
actually fascinating to me because I mean, and I relayed this to you before. I think for my listeners, the big struggle, especially the younger guys, 20s, I'll say, just to narrow it a little bit, they are really struggling to define what masculinity is in the current context. What does it mean to be a man in 2024? And one of the things that I've always believed is that we all put our own definition to what masculinity is, but there's also society's definition, and it's at this point, honestly, like you said, you could write 1,000-page book on it. I could write 1,000 pages of questions on to answer in that book because
Which would be a better book, by the way.
maybe we should collaborate. But it's funny because so many of the younger guys, and I'm not dismissing the older guys struggle with it. I struggle with it at times, right? But the younger ones in particular, college age into mid to late 20s, I hear from them all the time, right? I don't know what to do. That's how they'll phrase it to me, and I'm sure you hear it in your practice. And it was a big topic in the election, right? Walls was talking about what defines masculinity, and whether you agreed with it or not is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. In the sense that at least there was a discussion, right? But there was never
Mhm.
the question was put out there, but there was really no answer to it. And then, unfortunately, it became political, right? As opposed to let's try and help some of these guys out. As to the men that are listening to this, how do they go about for themselves defining what masculinity is? Because I think it's unique to every person, right? I hate when we try and put specific definitions on certain things, like what does it mean to be a man? Well, what does it mean to be to you or to me, right? Your concept and mine may be similar, but there's going to be differences. So, how would you address that right now?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that comes to mind is how do we approach the question of what is masculinity, and how do I, as a man, say a young man in these times, approach the question of what it is to be a man, what is masculinity? And I think if I start with the idea that the masculine represents consciousness, it's probably a good North Star to have, and because you can take that and really unpack that and take a deep dive into, well, what is why is masculinity representative of consciousness, and you could say, well, that's representative of order, and so it's just like, well, what does that mean? And you can take as deep of a dive as you want to, but I'll also say the way to, with the notion that masculine consciousness is sort of uh, synonymous, is that the best way to understand anything is to have something to contrast it.
Mm.
So then you might say, well, what is feminine? And okay, well, the feminine is unconscious. Well, you have to understand what that means too. It's like, it's also chaos. Now, I get that that can have, and rightfully so, sometimes have a negative connotation, but the chaos holds both promise and threat. It's not just threat. It's not just destruction, but it's also creation. And so, yeah, I think starting at this high level of what those two terms symbolize or represent is going to be the first thing that you do. And so, all right, consciousness, unconscious, order, chaos, and then you can sort of start to break those down. And then I would say just pay attention into, your own day-to-day life and how you might be living that way. And how you might brush up against the other side of that, the unconscious, the chaos, and the creation or destructive within that. And again, I know it's very vague and abstract, but how can you figure out the details of anything if you don't have at least some abstract idea of what we're sort of trying to learn here? You go to any good college course or class or anything, and they're going to start off with these high level, okay, here's a synopsis of what this class is about. But when you start to teach the class, it's like, okay, you have this and this, and here's what we're after. And then here's a little bit about what that is. And so people don't like that answer because it's not a detailed answer. Again, and we can get into that, but what you'll find is that there's a lot of other terms that derive from those very abstract terms, and the more that you get into that, the more detailed terms and descriptors, if you will, that you will find, and then you start to get a better idea of what masculinity is and what that means in the modern world. And so, what the modern world means when we say that is sort of the cultural context, the cultural canon of modern times, and how does it fit in that too? Because you can't just say, "Oh, I'm just going to be a man, and here's this traditional way that I'm going to be it," and disregard wherever culture is nowadays. Because part of being a man is contending with where culture is,
Mm.
and figuring out, okay, what might need to be brought to order here, and what needs to be brought to order in today's culture may not be the same thing that needed to be brought to order in culture 100 years ago.
Well, I mean, Ed, that's a fascinating thing, right? It's again talking with guys on a daily basis like I do. That's one of their big struggles. Is a lot of them are stuck with, well, I think I know what it means now, but they have in their mind, well, this is what I thought it was or what it was 50, 100, 200 years ago. And they struggle with coming to grips with that, right, on both ends. And, I try and say to them, you know, that's where you talk about high level concepts. You need to step back and look at it at a more high level, because they want to, like you mentioned, they want a list. Dan, give me a list of what I need to do to be a man. I can't give you that list. I mean, because again, what your list might be different than mine, and so on and so forth. And it's trying to help men understand that nothing stays the same, right? It throughout human history, things have changed. And where society is now is completely different than where it was 100, 200, 500 years ago. Completely different from where it'll be 100 years in the future. And it's trying to find their way through that. And that's where I want to kind of go next, because you talk about that journey, like how I segued that in there, in your book, right? And like some of the things you talked about right up front that were really striking to me is how men need to understand. I'm going to say it as themselves. I think you put it as redemptive skills in the book, right? Is understand things like uh, being compassionate. I'm going off the top of my head here. Humility, things like that, right? Something men struggle with, I think, not just for towards others, but especially towards themselves. And you kind of in the beginning of the books led me down the path of these are the first things that you really need to address. Was that your intention in the book? And can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, and of course, all of that stuff can be very complex, but it's still a good start, right? So the thing is say with the skill of assertiveness, which is one of the most important skills that anyone can learn. In fact, in the therapy world, assertiveness training essentially is the third most addressed issue, third only behind depression and anxiety.
Hmm.
And we all know that depression and anxiety are the top two issues that people come into, generally speaking. But what most people don't realize is that assertiveness is right behind that. And well, there's good reason for that, because if you're not assertive, then you're not getting what you need, and you're also not bringing any necessary order or stability to your environment whatsoever. And so, but in order for assertiveness to be most effective, in my opinion, seems to be that you also have to have some degree of mastery over empathy. And so, yeah, it kind of gets into compassion. And the reason I say master over empathy is that pegged out empathy and compassion is not always the best thing for every situation.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's like maybe you do need a little bit of that tough love. Maybe you do need to negotiate for yourself a little more than the other person, because maybe the other person's doing quite well negotiating for themselves. And so this, I touched on the trait agreeableness earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, have compassion, but what is the thing you're having compassion for? And I would say the reason that maybe men could stand to benefit from understanding more about compassion and being more compassionate is really understanding the thing that you're being compassionate about. And the reason I say that is because, well, we men don't often understand the function behind a woman's behavior. And you could say that women tend to behave and communicate covertly. They say and do one thing, but they also could mean two or three other things. And well, which is it? Where men tend to think more covertly. We see things at face value. We kind of mean what we say for the most part. I'm not saying that men can't communicate covertly and that women can't communicate overtly. But typically speaking, just because the nature of men and women tend to be more ambiguous and men tend to be more overt, and
Mm-hmm.
we mean what we say and we don't really have anything else behind it, typically. Um, so as men, because I think it's important to stick within sort of the framework here of men and obviously relationships, whether you're looking for one or in one, is that how we see the woman's behavior, and for better or worse, but it's more about what's the function of the behavior. What are they trying to get to? And this kind of gets back to the idea of the hero fight with the dragon, and what is the good that the dragon holds that we need and can only get if we slay the dragon. And sometimes slaying the dragon in, say, a marriage is trying to figure out what the hell she really means and why she's acting this way and why am I so frustrated and why am I not getting anywhere with this? And instead of taking that challenge on, we will try to do our best to convince her that she should not give me those problems, or we'll just get passive and shut down, which is even worse,
Hmm.
or maybe not worse, but maybe being aggressive and retaliating is worse. But none of those really work to get anywhere. So I almost forgot your question at this point,
No,
but
this is
it's
fascinating
yeah.
to me, Ed, because again, it ties into what I hear from my followers all the time, right? Is you hit the nail on the head, communication differences, right? And I talk about it frequently when I do videos. Is some of that I think I'm influenced by men are from Mars, women are from Venus, way back when, and all. I mean, I remember reading that book when I was in my late 20s and all that. And John Gray, was that the author, if I remember right?
Mhm.
He had an influence on me, but because I've had women say to me, well, I have a lot say negative things, but I have had very many say to me, "You seem to get us better than most," and I directly attribute it to the book. It's nothing I don't think inherent in me, but this is the struggle that men face. And you talked about the two big issues. One being shutting down. I'll just put my head in the sand, be the ostrich, put my head in the sand, and somehow that will work. That ain't ever going to work, in my opinion. It's the worst. I think it's the worst thing you can do. Personal opinion. But then the other side of it is learning. I always put it as learning how to communicate in a way that works for the other person. And like you said, there is no black and white here. There's so much gray in between. How do men like be able to do that? Because you're trying to touch on that in the book a little bit. Is you're talking about it in terms of assertiveness too, to kind of tie that in as well, because men are afraid sometimes to go down this path. I see this issue. To me, it's black and white. I've tried to communicate. They'll say to me, "I've tried to communicate with her, and she doesn't get it." Well, my argument is you've got to reframe it in a way she can understand. That right or wrong. Again, I am not a mental health professional. I just give my opinion.
Yeah, well, keep talking to her like one of your buddies, one of
It's not going
your,
to work,
your
right?
guy friends, and good luck, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to learn how to communicate in a way that she's receptive to.
And vice versa too, right? And it's one thing that I've always done that for myself when I've struggled with that is I say put it in writing. And it's worked for me. That's write your thoughts down and hand them to her, and vice versa. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's the thing. But going back
Yeah.
to what you were talking about within the concepts of the book is, you know, trying to build that bridge, for lack of a better term, of communication. Where does that begin? What do you think on that? Because so many men that I think, at least the ones that I talk to, that's the struggle they're having is they cannot figure it out. I certainly haven't figured it out. I'm 61 years old. I don't know that anybody can figure it out, but can you give some thoughts on that within the context of what you do?
Yeah, well, there's three parts to the book, and part one is aptly named "Who Am I?" And so I think that's important for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is because I have to look at myself and what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, which means I have to learn more about myself. And some of those things may be very unpleasant, but the truth may, what do they say? The truth may uh, set you free, but it's going to hurt first.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is, and there's a chapter called partner type. So it's really sort of beginning to understand, what kind of partner are you in this relationship as a man, and within that. I really try to base a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of that again on personality, the personality psychology, the Big Five model. And I can't stress it enough, but if I were anybody, and well, I recommend it to anyone, is go take the Big Five personality, and I can give, the website that's the real cheap, affordable. It's $10, and it's probably the best available personality assessment out there, and I've used it with hundreds of clients. So if you need to, I can give that to you. But the point is go take this thing, have your significant other take the thing, and on this website, it's really cool because they'll also give you a relationship report. So it's sort of what to expect, given the differences or similarities in each trait and aspect. But this really gives you a good, solid idea and starting point of who you are.
Hey fans, I just wanted to take a quick break from the show to remind you just how much we here at Men Need to Be Heard truly appreciate and value your support. And we'd like to ask you to do us a little favor. It won't cost you a dime, and it'll only take a few seconds out of your day. Could you take a moment to give us that like, give us that thumbs up on the video, and even share it with your friends? Doing so will help us to spread the word and continue to raise awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's modern world. And we'd love to hear what you have to say on today's topic. So don't forget to comment down below and let us know how we're doing. Your input and feedback means the world to us, and it helps us to continue bringing great guests and even more content each and every week. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. It's the best way to stay up to date with all of our latest discussions, interviews, and deep dives into the issues men and boys face. It also helps the channel to grow so that we can continue to raise even more awareness on the issues. So hit that subscribe button and become part of the Men Need to Be Heard community. All right, that's it for now. Back to the show.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the first things that I would say people do, and again, it's within the context of this book, there's a section on partner types in the first part of the book, which is who am I, which is important because I can't figure out anything else about the world and certainly can't fix anything outside of the world myself if I'm not in position to do so. And so naturally, the first thing to do is to start figuring out who I am and what kind of partner type I am. So I kind of go through a few different partner types. There's a form of alpha, and then I think one is sort of a hybrid of two in a worse way, this sort of degenerate leader. And they're sort of the nice guy, and none of these ideas are really original to me. But I'd really take again back to the Big Five model of personality. Is that I base a lot of what that is on that model, and so it's kind of like if I can have a couple of terms or abstract ideas, high level ideas of what kind of partner I can be.
So what we were talking about, Ed, is beginning that process of building the bridge within the relationship, and starting with defining yourself, I guess, is for lack of a better term. And again, probably the toughest thing. You mentioned earlier it could be very painful, and this was something that I had to deal with. As I went through some horrific stuff when I was younger, neither here nor there right now, and it took me till I was about 40 to kind of figure it all out. And it directly caused issues for me. And the struggle that I had more than anything else was, I call it taking responsibility for myself, acknowledging, in my case, is allowing someone else to control me and all that stuff. Everybody has different experiences that they bring along in life. But when it comes to, getting prepared to do, I'm relating to the journey, okay? Getting prepared for all that and then making those first overt steps. One of the big things that guys will say is, yeah, but if I open up to her or I try and communicate with her, I'm going to pay. And I talk about that a lot because men do, to be honest with you. How do you overcome that initial fear, not just of, let's say, her, probably not the best way to put it, but also facing the fear within yourself? How do you start your journey with that?
Well, courage and willingness, high level there. I don't think that without courage, you can extract any promise from the chaotic unknown. But I would say that we fail to recognize that there's so much gold on the other side of any challenge we face, and I would say maybe more than most, if not all, are those challenges within marriage or long-term relationships. Um, so we tend to forget that there's this thing that with the challenge, what I call the feminine challenge, of if we really take that on and we try to, I don't know, conquer that in a way that's beneficial for everyone involved, which brings out the best in me and brings out the best in you,
Mhm.
then I think if you take that approach, if that's your orientation, or if you at least experiment with it, because you can change your mind if you think it doesn't work, is that what you're going to find is that this is going to lead to more detail of the next thing I need to do, the next step. I'm going to learn more about what steps I need to take, and there's going to be a paradigm shift with me sooner or later with how I view these challenges and the meaning and potential behind them. And it sort of gets into maybe the overall bigger problem that certainly lies, outside of masculinity, is sort of the meaning crisis. And we're running around with little to no meaning and sense of purpose. Um, but if we think about our development, it's like, okay, what lies on the other side of this challenge? And I know if I run from the dragon, it's certainly not going to get the gold. In fact, it's going to be worse because, well, the dragon's going to hunt you down and find you, and it's going to be much more devastating.
Well, you're kind of touching on another thing that I wanted to talk about, which was in the book, was where you talk about vulnerability, right? And allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Something I think men really struggle with, and I understand why. Don't get me wrong. I'm not certainly not putting anyone down by saying that. I struggle with it, right? I still do. I at times I'm pretty open with my emotions and feelings, but there's times that vulnerability dragon, if you will rear its ugly head, and I will shut myself down. And it's to your point, that's never a good thing. At least in my experience, it never has been a good thing. There are times I probably could argue that's a yes, it is a good thing for me to do. Maybe short term, but long term, you've got to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And you kind of touch on some of that concept in the book. And how do you say to men, and understand those of you listening, this is a very good book. We're just highlighting some of the concepts in it. You need to go read the book, right? But how would you kind of talk about that a little bit with someone uh, to kind of help them overcome that unwillingness to be vulnerable?
Yeah. So, kind of a simple way that I would put this is that a real man does what he wants. And if a real man wants to cry, he'll cry.
Hmm.
The difference is where that's coming from. Because if my vulnerability is coming from a place of weakness, good luck ever getting my wife to be okay with that. Even if she appears to be supportive in the moment, she's going to catch on pretty quickly that this is coming from a place of weakness. And now I'm having to be the masculine, play the masculine role in this marriage, and that's not what she wants to do. But if I could be emotional and vulnerable, and it's coming from a place of strength, then that's really what it comes down to. Again, not to oversimplify here,
Hmm.
but it's this whole thing of like, okay, you want to be a man who has, a strong inner authority where you decide what your fate is, so to speak. That you get to decide if what's happening here is going to be your fate or your destiny. Then, like, don't place this external condition on what you can and cannot do. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't limitations, right? But then maybe the limitations is within me and where it comes from. And so to me, it's like if I'm moved by something beautiful, deep, and profound, and I share that with my wife, and I choke up and have a tear roll down my cheek doing so or saying it. Um, I'm coming from this place of like I'm convicted in this thing,
Hmm.
and we can see that. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, you can see it. But if I'm, and not to say that anxiety is bad, because I certainly have anxiety about some things. Um, but even if I'm taking on that anxiety from a place of strength and courage, that's always going to be perceived and experienced as something much more remarkable than if I'm just coming to you scared and dependent and totally relying on you as my wife or whoever to make me feel better. To get this off my chest so I don't carry this stuff around and carelessly just dump it on you. So yeah, is it coming from a place of strength or weakness? And I know we can get more into that, and that's not the
Well,
only factor, but it's a good one.
you're touching on something that I really think we should talk about a little bit because it's a struggle that men have when they try and make themselves vulnerable or think about, let me rephrase that, think about making themselves vulnerable. I always joke, uh, I can't watch Saving Private Ryan, the last scene where he's on the bridge firing his pistol, and not cry. I've seen it 100 times, more than that. For whatever reason, that touches me emotionally. And I've done speaking engagements where I've shared that when we're talking about vulnerability, and I'll say to some of the audience, "Would you do that in front of your wife?" Oh God, no. If I did that, she would think less of me as a man, right? My wife has seen me watch that movie. She knows what's going to come because she's seen me watch it. I watch it all the time. It's my favorite all time movie. How do we get men to understand that, yes, there is a risk to being that vulnerable and shedding a tear, if you will, but the benefits that can come out of it by doing so within the relationship now, right? I'm talking about some fictional movie, but it's the same process within a relationship because, and I talk about it many times myself, there are women that will weaponize it against you. You know it, I know it, it's a fact of life. But if you're in a good relationship, you should be able to do so without that fear. But how do men get to that point? Because I think a lot of times you kind of hit where I wanted to go with this. It's more the men causing it than the women because that whole masculine feminine side of things, right? I mean, would you agree, disagree? Where, what do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, one of the most common complaints I've had from so many men is, well, I try to be vulnerable, and then my wife or my girlfriend didn't like it, and she had this thing to say, so that's why you can't be vulnerable. And I'm like, that doesn't sound very much like the man you want to be, who lets external forces dictate what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So again, kind of back to that, where is it coming from? And it's like, you know what? Even in the face of that, okay, and I agree, like society has this terrible narrative. A lot of the times it's like, hey, you need to step up and be a man. And then a man tries to step up and be a man. And then we're ridiculed. Oh, look at you, manly man. And well, like, okay, which is it? And it's like, we can complain about that, and understandably so, but you can opt out of that game
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it is in some sense. And so guys will start complaining, well, they have this, they pin us against these two things. They want us to step up and be a man, and they ridicule us. And now we can't do it. It's like, who says that they get to decide how you get to be a man?
Right.
And I do believe that in any in a relationship that has any degree of health between a man and a woman, the woman is essentially, and we know this psychologically and even mythologically, is that she's sort of a barometer. And I wrote about this in the book, but she's this barometer of whether or not I'm moving towards my magnificence as a man or away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's experienced in my relation to her. And if I am experiencing love and appreciation from her, then that's an indication that I'm moving towards that most magnificent self. And maybe I can say that's because I'm being conscious and I'm coming from a place of strength. And if I'm moving away from that, I'm probably going to experience that with, tension with her and challenges from her. So it's understanding sort of this, there's this facade of these challenges that we experience. And what happens is that we take it from the surface level and say, well, they're just making it impossible. Why can't they just make it easy on me? And I'm like, nothing worthwhile has ever come easy. Like we all know that. We'll spout that, yet we'll go home and buckle down and not know how to act with our wives. And so, where am I coming from that? What am I seeing? Am I seeing, well, I started off in the book with this sort of notion of the feminine dragon of chaos emerging from the dungeon from her sleep and finding herself in this modern world that she's been sort of tucked away for 2,000 years. And so there's this imagery here where she's come to the surface, and it's 2024, and she doesn't even speak the same language. She speaks a language it's a dead language, all things considered.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's out looking for her masculine counterpart. Where is he? Where is he? And then people are like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And we don't even understand you, and we're afraid, or at least we just think you're annoying and you're a pest. And sort of the feminine dragon of chaos gets more and more angry and upset. And so who's going to come, tame this dragon, so to speak? Because what happens, and the reason I say it's feminine, because it represents the unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
chaos, and within the unconscious, what is that? Like there's this beautiful, whole, and intact woman waiting inside, say, the belly of the dragon, waiting to be cut out. And all we see is the dragon sometimes, and these challenges that piss us off or hurt our feelings or dictate who we are as a man, instead of seeing like, oh, here's this thing, because I know that there's more to these challenges with my wife or whoever. And if I learn how to sort of get through to that and pull her and free the captive woman out of that, the true
Mhm.
who she has the potential to be, because she can't do it herself in some sense. She has to have, just like we have to have the stage of the relationship to be the man that we could, she has to have the stage of relationship to become the woman that she could, to fully develop herself psychologically and spiritually. So there's this sort of mythological undertone in our relationships, and we think it's silly and goofy and absurd. But if you pay attention to that and really consider how that's playing out in your own relationship, you'll start to figure out, like, okay, this really is playing out this way. It's like, yeah, there's the things that we're doing in the real world, but if I understand what's truly happening on a fundamental level, then it changes the whole game. And I think it's, well, the book sort of sets you up with that idea. But again, it's like maybe part of what it means to be a man in this world is knowing what game to play and what game you need to opt out of. Because if the world dictates who you are, that's because you allow it to let it dictate who you are.
Do you think, Ed, within relationships, I mean, the big struggle is all the stuff that we're talking about and being able to pull the best out of each other, right? I always say that the sum of the two parts is far greater, or the sum of the whole of compared to the two parts is significantly better. But within the context of today's society, where, to be blunt, men and women are at war with each other right now. Just look at the last week. You got women running around cutting off their hair because of a political election, which guys are both laughing, crying, upset. It's all over the place with it. And wherever anyone stands on that is irrelevant, but it's just within the context of the example of it is this speaks to how there's a complete disconnect going on. And I think that's in society we're talking about, but it's bleeding down into relationships. And like you talk about pulling that amazing woman out of the, let's call it the dragon's belly, so to speak. As a man listening to that, the first question I'm going to ask is, okay, I understand the concept, but how the hell do I do it? you know. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I have these four pillars, so to speak, and I have a chapter on each one of them, and it's assertiveness, character, frame, and confidence. And I spoke about assertiveness earlier. So if you don't know how to be assertive, then good luck stabilizing anything that's happening that's in disarray, disorder, that's chaotic. Good luck to stabilizing that, because
Mm-hmm.
as long as the hurricane is coming through, why are you outside trying to pick up the lawn furniture? You got to wait till the storm passes and then go pick up the pieces, so to speak. So, in some sense, that assertiveness really creates the order necessary for everything else that's necessary to happen in the marriage to be able to happen. And the other part of that is you have to have good character. And how are you showing up as a man? And one thing that you kind of touched on earlier is sort of, well, how is she going to receive what you say? Because if you're just talking to her like one of your buddies, good luck getting her to understand anything, right? Or to connect with you. So who are you? What is your character? What are you bringing forth? And frame is sort of, I was touching on a moment ago, with you get to decide what game you play, and if you need to opt out of it, because frame is sort of, well, it's you could say it's the your schema around things. So maybe we need to improve our schema, but essentially it's the ability to stay on course to get what you want. And hopefully what you want is good and moral. But the idea is that, the world is full of distractions and misdirections, and people and our wives can be really convincing in some sense, to get us to deviate from our path. And so one is like, character helps you make sure that you have a good and moral outcome that you're pursuing. Frame is the mental structure that allows you to get from point A to point B with that good and moral goal.
Mm-hmm.
And confidence is a big part of that too. And because if you're weak and insecure, good luck getting anyone to follow you, so to speak, or to trust you, to receive you, to connect with you. And so what do you need to do to build confidence? And I get into it a little bit, but you have to achieve these hierarchical victories. What's going to move me up the hierarchy of my life? So I need to be assertive to stabilize and create the order necessary for everything else. I definitely have to make sure I have good character, which means I need to be warm and compassionate when I need to be compassionate and warm, but I also need to be pretty reliable. And that also means that I don't just wax and wane with every little emotion that comes along. And I need to be able to maintain, focus with what I'm trying to do with myself and my relationship and my marriage. And I need the confidence to sort of back that up. And I need to do things that build confidence. And again, high level here, but those four things, if you really start to zero in on, you're going to notice some immediate gains and they're going to be sustainable.
Well, you talk about confidence, right? So one of the things as I was reading through the book, because again, I relate it to my followers, right? And a lot of them struggle with their confidence, and women pick up on that. And to be blunt, it turns women off. I mean, and they will, if you're trying to communicate with a woman and you don't have the confidence behind it, you might as well put a solid brick wall, with titanium outsert metal on it because they'll tune you right out. At least I have found that, and I've been guilty of it. First to admit it, and I'm a pretty confident guy. But there are times that I've not been with certain. If there's a certain issue that I want to bring up that I'm not comfortable with, my confidence is not where it should be. And that's where, one of the things that the takeaways that I got from the book is, and you just said it, is you've got to be able to build your confidence in ways that work for you. Like you said, small
Mhm.
steps. The mistake that I can see a lot of people making is they want to go from A to Z and skip all the letters in between, where it's A, B, C, D, and stuff like that. And these are the challenges that I think today's men are facing is how the hell do I do that, right? I want to appear confident, but if I appear too confident, well, she might think I'm being abusive. I mean, that's where they'll leap to. Some of them are not wrong, by the way, right? And that goes to the context of what we started earlier in the program is, with society defining things. How can you give me some examples like when you were going through the journey? How you were, I assume, were trying to build some confidence. What were some of the ways that you are willing to share or pull from others that you've worked with that helped men to build that confidence? What are some of the things? Let's call there's nothing easy, but let's say the easy ones they can do.
Yeah. Um, Speak even if your voice shakes. Most of us have heard that term. And essentially what I mean is you got to take the chance.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say there's two levels of analyses here with confidence. You have this like, okay, if you can't go speak confidently and be able to back that up with who you are as a man, and if you're trying to, I don't know, pick up women, right? Like there's going to be this, oh, you goofy, insecure boy, I'm not even talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there is also something about the guy who tries to talk anyway. So there's this sort of other level here. And we can get into some evolutionary psychology on this, which is super fascinating. But part of this that whole process is, and kind of getting to confidence here with that is if I got rejected and then I regroup and I come back and I try and I'm zeroing in even more
Mm-hmm.
even though I was totally rejected that first time. Now, it doesn't mean you're always going to get a second chance to, redeem yourself, so to speak. But oftentimes we do. That's indicative of confidence. So it's like, okay, this boy was an idiot when he tried to come hit on me, but he's back. And there's suddenly, it's like, we've often seen it's like there's a change in attitude here. It's like, oh, maybe I'll entertain this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe
I,
there's still some degree of rejection. Then they come back and it's like, okay, persistence won out. So there's this thing that's like, okay, you don't have to appear confident in the sense of, I've got it all together.
right.
And that works and that's important and we need that. But the other thing is it's sort of the confidence of putting yourself out there, even if you're afraid, even if you do have some inadequacies. But I'm going to carry all of that and still put myself out there. There's something to be said about that, and maybe it's a bit more obscure than what we typically see. But part of that is you got to put yourself out there. You have to be willing, and maybe this kind of gets back to your questions around vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
and are we coming from a place of strength or weakness? And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to speak even if my voice shakes and look like an idiot and a fool. Um, But what we'll see is that people begin to see the charm of that, the appeal to that. Okay, tucked in there is this confidence and potential. There's someone who can extract the gold out of the chaos, who can
Hmm.
step into the uncharted territory and begin to get something. Because is it really all that remarkable if you have it all figured out and you can just go charm your way into getting someone's number? It's like, yeah, yeah, maybe it works, but how sustainable and endearing is that, you know? And so I don't know if it makes a whole lot of sense. I
No,
kind of
it's
rambled a
I'm
little bit
kind
there.
of chuckling, Ed, because and it's happened when I was reading the book. Also, I was relaying what you were just saying to me in high school. Right, I pimply faced teenage boy, zero confidence. Right, as far with the ladies, so to speak. Right, and there was a first day of high school, first period of the first class I ever took in high school. In walked this vision. Her name was Lori. I won't share her last name. And I just went, bleh, right? And for 4 years, I didn't have the balls to ask her out. 4 years of high school, right? Um, Long story short, I just had no confidence. When I came out of high school, I knew that was a problem. And this kind of goes where I want to go with. And I just said, what are you doing, Dan? Right? And I became the exact opposite to the polar opposite. I said, I'm going to ask everybody out. And I would get rejected, and I'm like, one number off just gets me closer to the goal, closer to the goal, closer to the goal. And so I went too far that way. And then, we're growing up. It's how you find your equilibrium. Long story short, after my first divorce, I contacted Lori, the girl I was in love with in high school, and we started dating. And we didn't end up getting married. It just wasn't going to work at that point. But again, I languished for 4 years, and she and I got along great. And that's where again it's I had to build my confidence to just get there. My mistake was I went way the other way. It was like I would hit on every girl in the bar. I would go right down the line, and that's not good either. But it speaks to what you're talking about, and I was relaying to some of that in the book, right? Because assertiveness, confidence, to me, they're kind of intertwined, right? It's if you have the assertiveness, the confidence comes with it, and vice versa, right? If you have the confidence, you can be assertive. But I just thought I would share that and make you laugh a little bit because I see you smiling.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good story too. And yeah, good way to redeem yourself by
Yeah,
making that phone call afterwards.
yeah. It
I'm
was
sure you had
a it
a
was what the fuck do I have to lose? Let me go do it.
yeah, yeah.
You
It's
know.
fun and a good experience, and then you integrate that experience to who you are now, and it lends to your ability to help men. And so don't ever discount that. That's for sure. So this kind of brings me to the idea of redemption, and part of the book here is redemptive and heroic skills, and what does that mean?
Mhm.
And typically, and redemption is. Such a fascinating notion to me, and I've given it a lot of serious and deep thought. And one of the things I'm realizing lately, and I didn't touch on this in a book, but I'm realizing this lately, and it still fits, is that I think we tend to look at redemption as righting a wrong for the sake of righting the wrong because it's the right thing to do. But why is it the right thing to do? And I think we tend to look at, well, when you think of redemption, you also may think of the word sin, which really means to miss the mark, which is an old archery term, really. And so that's a fascinating way to look at sin. So you have this idea of redemption, and it's like, okay, well, maybe redemption means have transgressed upon someone, and maybe even myself in some sense, and now I have to right that wrong. I have to make amends and change the way that I live because of that. But essentially, it's like I have to right my wrong because you're supposed to be good. I was like, that doesn't really hold up too much if you really sort of try to break it down. And what I think redemption truly is fundamentally, and not to make this religious, but I think you can look at the story of Christ and sort of what that whole story of redemption was. And there's this aspect of purgatory, right? Because he's crucified, he dies, descends to hell, and what happens there? Kicks down the gates of hell, and he redeems the souls that have been held in purgatory.
Mhm.
And reemerges with salvation, freedom in some sense. So there's this overall narrative arc of, you have to get to this point where maybe you feel God forsaken and experience some sort of, little death, some psychological death, which is really descending into your own shadow, your own uh, dark, frightening aspects of life and everything that you knew. But when you, well, slay the dragon, so to speak, that's the opportunity to become the hero, to face and slay the dragon and extract something from there. Well, what is it that you're extracting? And you're extracting some part of you that's been held in potential. You're redeeming that aspect out of purgatory. Here's this aspect. It's like, here's something so valuable that's been held down for whatever reason. And we can, play the blame game here and understandably so in some sense that the way culture and society is today and all of the real things that we have to contend with. But if we really take that on and take it seriously and understand that maybe it really does come down to a life or death situation, even though it may not be immediate, is that what potential goodness is sort of held in purgatory because I'm not courageous enough to speak even if my voice shakes, to be vulnerable with my wife, to check to see if I'm coming from a place of strength or weakness, and to take that fight on, to slay that dragon and free the captive. And part of that, there's just multiple levels happening here with that. One is it's helping me redeem those amazing aspects of those magnificent aspects of myself that are held in purgatory because I'm not taking on the challenge that brings those forth. Um, and it does that for my wife. So if I help her do that, now she has a responsibility in that. I'm not taking all the credit for her, but my responsibility is to see to it that that's taking place. And so there's these aspects of her being held in her own purgatory of her unconscious, if you will,
Hmm.
and how I interact with that, the order that I bring and the orientation that I have with all of that brings those beautiful aspects of who she is as a feminine woman out of the purgatory of her unconscious, her inner self, and brings those forth. And then what happens collectively, transcendently, is that we bring the most beautiful aspects of our marriage out of the purgatory of our marriage because that have been held in purgatory because we're not taking on the challenges. We're not figuring out how to extract those things for whatever reason, because we're scared, because we don't want to be too vulnerable, because we want predictability. We can't stand to deal with uncertainty and suffering. But if we courageously take that on, what happens is we redeem those aspects out of purgatory. And those are what these skills that we've talked about so far lead to. Those are the redemptive skills. Those are the heroic skills that allow us to take on the dragon and redeem those beautiful aspects from who we are as individuals and within our relationships.
And again, it's a mutually beneficial thing, right? As you start doing that for her, she's going to respond in her way to do the same for you. And I think that's really lost today with relationships. It's, we're in that divorce culture, for lack of a better term. The first sign of trouble, split, as opposed to, hey, we got some issues. Let's sit down and talk about them. But again, it goes back to what we talked about. You got to be able to communicate right and do all that stuff. But it really speaks to, I think, what's lost, right? One of the things that I was taking away from the book is a lot of what you talk about, all of the concepts and all of that. To me, they're lost right now. It's society, for whatever reason, has taken that away from men and women in the ability to communicate and have a good solid relationship. It's almost like they vilify it. you know, if both parties are working together to bring out the best in each other and themselves at the same time, somehow or another we've made that into a bad thing. and I do not understand it. I don't know how it benefits society in any way. I freely admit at this point, I'm telling guys, be careful getting into a marriage. I'm not anti-marriage by any means, right? But because of that cultural norm, if you will, to just split at the first sign of trouble, that there's a lot of risk to guys with that because they tend to lose everything in court, right? So how do we move that forward within the context of ourselves, right? To, all right, I hear what Ed's saying. I want to make this happen. I'm going to overcome my fear. But there's another dragon out there called society that's putting pressure on us. How do we move that forward, Ed? I mean, that's the question that I have, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also the dragon of commitment, and
That's another one.
maybe
Yeah.
and I'm sure if we really got down to it, we might be more on the same page than what it might sound like when I say this. But on the surface, I'm a little bit different than you in the sense that I'm always like, yeah, go get married right away, do it now, commit.
Really?
Yes, yes, yes. So
Really? I'm fascinated.
we're getting married much later, all right, and so you have this sort of this societal narratives that we definitely contend with that often aren't very helpful, right? Is that but the older we get, like there's more pressure because we are older because we don't have as much time, and we also have this pressure of like, okay, well, I'm in my late 20s now, I'm nearing 30, and I I should have my life together developmentally to here. Um, and with that says, I know a lot about what I want and what I don't want. All things considered, I mean, however much you can have that figured out at 30. Um, and I'm just using that number because that's probably about the new average of when people are trying to get married or getting married. But what that really puts me in the pressure is now I have to find someone who also fits what they want and don't want for themselves that aligns with what I want. And that's really hard to find if we're looking at it at that level. So what I'm really getting at here is that we think we have to find someone who's absolutely compatible with us. And I don't think
Ah,
that's the case at all.
okay.
But think about when we got married when we were 18, and think of just, culturally here, however far back we have to go for that. You have no idea what you want in life,
Right.
but you're committing to this lifelong relationship, to this marriage. And it's almost like, I don't know the details of what I want. You don't know the details of what you want. We're going to have to figure that out. So what that really does, it gives us this unique opportunity to learn how to become compatible along the way from this early age, because we don't really know what the hell we want anyway. And I'm not saying that's a conscious narrative, but it's an
No, I,
unconscious narrative. And if there's I don't know, this is, I'm going to put this out there a little bit, right? But the divorce rate for arranged marriages is about 4 to 6%. And make whatever inferences you want, but I kind of got a theory on that. It's like, why is the divorce rate so low for arranged marriages? And to me, I think there has something to do with the fact that because it is arranged, you're coming in not knowing anything about the person, but you're committing for life. And there's this sort of, it's at the forefront of your mind anyway, that I have to get to know this person and I have to figure out from scratch how to get along with this person, which means finding out what we're incompatible with and then working to become compatible with those things. Whereas here, it's like there aren't arranged marriages. We're getting older before we get married. We have a better idea of what we want. And the minute that someone else doesn't align whatsoever, and sometimes that's 3 months into dating, and sometimes, unfortunately, that's 3 years into marriage, we say, you know what, we've just grown apart. We're no longer compatible, and that's why we're separating or divorcing. And to that, I say, how can you grow apart if you've never grown together? Is it that you become incompatible, or have you, has the conflict you've experienced, the obstacles in your path, really helped expose these areas of incompatibility that you didn't know existed? So your perception, and I think it's an illusion. We think we have to, oh, we're compatible, we have all of this stuff, and you're going to hit a buzzsaw. And what are you going to do when you hit that buzzsaw?
I'm fascinated, Ed. I got to be honest with you, because I totally understand your points. Right? It's in a matter of speaking, and I'll relay this to Lindsay, who's my partner on my live show that I do, where they got married very young and had no clue what they were doing. And they had some bumps along the way, but their marriage, she was just here visiting her husband, and I was like, it was sickening how much in love they are. But I think, and she's talked about, it's because they went through that journey together that made their marriage as strong as it is. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with that. It is the opposite of what we're doing now, where I can't get married until everything's perfect in my life. I got to have the perfect career, blah, 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 whatever your list is. Same thing people will argue with kids. That's the one thing I'll always say to them. I had my kids young, thank God. I got them out the door by 51. I could go live my life. Whereas now, I mean, I have a dear friend. She had twins at 45. We're the exact same age. I'm 61. I can't even fathom having kids in the house right now. But it speaks to what you're talking about, right? Is having that journey together. And again, you got to incorporate some of the concepts in the book to do that. It speaks to, like you were talking about with arranged marriages. It's that negotiation, I guess, is the way I'll put it. And
Yeah, yeah,
that's what you're talking about, right?
yeah. So it's well, yeah, obviously it's committing, but what are you committing to? And I think that we don't really understand what we're committing to when we get married. And to me, one way I think you could put it, and a useful way to put this, is what we're committing to is becoming compatible. There's this Catholic notion, and one of my clients actually brought it up to me. I had never heard of this before, and until then, and it really fit with the way well, kind of what I'm saying here, and I fell in love with this notion. But he said that he married a Catholic woman, and they were in premarital counseling with the priest, and the priest told them that in marriage, the job of the husband and wife is to get each other into heaven. And I thought, what an incredible concept.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because it's like if I see you doing something that's not going to get you into heaven, I have to say something. Now, how fun is that? Because
And I'm not
if I'm doing
religious.
something
I'm not
if I'm
religious
doing
at
something I
all,
don't want to,
but I
yeah, if
like
I'm
that.
doing something that's not going to get me in heaven, it probably means I'm having a whole lot of fun, right?
Yeah.
And or it's I'm avoiding work essentially. And so if you tell me that now, I've got to reconsider that. But there's this idea that it's like what a huge responsibility to put on people, and it's like you're committing to that. So what does that mean? It's like, well, why is that the job? Because now I have to be different than you and live differently and point out how, because you're different than me, I might see how what you're doing isn't going to get you into heaven. And essentially, what that's saying from a psychological perspective is that what I see you doing is not going to help you develop into who you could be. And I think we have a responsibility that, in fact, if we want to stick with the religious motif here, is that uh, I think it's a sin not to tell the other person that what they're doing isn't going to get them into heaven, which means I have to confront you that we're going to have conflict. And how I'm oriented towards that, how we're both oriented towards that can make all the difference in the world. I've been working on this theory. It's very early on, but the sort of hierarchy of conflict. And maybe sort of at the top, first and foremost, or maybe it's the bottom hill. I don't know how you'd look at that, but it's if you both are at least oriented towards having a meaningful existence together, then I think anything else can be reconciled.
Mhm.
But maybe with that, if it's not what you want, then there's nothing to reconcile. You can work on everything else. You can work on your values. You can work on your personal interest, your communication styles, everything else, personality. But if you're not oriented towards that, then good luck. But if you can at least say, fundamentally, we're both oriented towards living a meaningful life together, then we can figure out the rest of it. So I think that we can um, understand fundamentally what we're oriented towards, and knowing that, hey, conflict, we're going to encounter obstacles. Because here's the thing, this is conflict. Uh, we encounter an obstacle and maybe we get over that pretty well. Why do we get over that pretty well and pretty easily? It's because we both sort of had the same idea of how to overcome it.
Mhm.
But eventually we come upon one where I have a way, a solution to overcoming that obstacle, and you have one, and it's a lot different than mine. And now it's like whose solution is best? And by default, it's whose is dumb and whose is smart, and so so it's like what happens is we let the obstacle turn us against each other. But if we remember that, hey, how are we going to manage conflict when we hit those obstacles, that we differ on how we overcome it? And if we can at least say, okay, well, let's at least remember that that's the thing. And so it's like but that obstacle has revealed an area in which we're incompatible, how we're going to overcome that obstacle. And what that entails is sort of the morals, or at least the moral foundations, because there's 6 moral foundations that make up morality, by the way. Is it our moral foundations that we're not compatible with on this particular kind of thing? Is it our fundamental values? Is it our interest? Is it our personalities? Because the way I see to take it is to, take care of other people because I'm agreeable. And the way that you see it is, no, we have to negotiate for ourselves to make sure we get what we need. So you have all these things, and the more of those obstacles that we run into, the more we get this idea that's like, you know what, we're no longer compatible and we've grown apart. And it's like, no, you're just getting started.
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to where we are as a society. And one of the issues that I always say to people is stop expecting perfection from your partner. Or they're not going to agree with you 100%. If you get, I always use this, by the way, with politics. If you get a politician that you agree with 70% of the time, there's your vote. Because you're never going to get somebody that's 100%. Although in today's society, that's what we expect. And I think that's carrying over in relationships. And I use myself, you know, I am happily married. There are a couple things that we absolutely disagree on, and we're never going to compromise on that. And you know what? That's okay. It doesn't mean I don't love her. Doesn't mean she doesn't love me. Doesn't mean that our marriage is going to end. There's just fundamental differences, and we just agree to disagree. And that's lost these days, you know. And she
Yeah.
has persuasive arguments on her side. I think I have persuasive ones on mine. That's why I laughed when you said one is stupid and one is dumb, because she's telling me mine is dumb. She's not trying to be mean. She's joking. But, you know, it speaks to where we need to, and I think men need to kind of take the lead on some of this, right? Because here's the other thing I wanted to kind of touch with you, base with you on is over the last 50 years or so, I think men have started stepping back more and more, right? You talk about being the leader and all that stuff. And some of that is we've been taught to be that way. I was, right? Uh, Good, bad, and different, whatever. But men, I think in general, have stepped back, and women don't respect that. At least in my experience, I don't see that. But it's also finding a way to, again, we're tying in all these concepts because they're all intertwined. Being assertive, having the confidence to take the lead, all of that stuff that we've kind of talked about. But then it's making that first step, and then you're going to have some repercussions at times. That's life. But again, we're talking about that dragon that's out there, and yeah, there's this dragon here and this dragon here, but the one that you're focused on, your partner, that's the one you need to focus on and approach in the way that works for both of you. Again, it goes back to, I keep throwing this question out, how do we do it, right? It's knowing that men now have stepped back so far, how do we bring it forth both as individuals and as a society?
Well, like so much of other things we've talked about today, it's certainly complex. You know, earlier you mentioned we were talking about culture and society and sort of like the cultural canons, and we do have to contend with that and understand how to operate within that. And you made a comment sort of to the effect of, you know, things are always changing, culture is always changing, society is always changing in some sense. Um, but to me, one of the constants in that is the fact that you don't get to skip the part where you have to be initiated into development. And for men, you don't get to skip the part where you have to be initiated into manhood, so to speak, into the mature masculinity. And so it's like, all right, what process and what experiences do I need to have to really get initiated?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we're, especially with the book we talked about, it's within the context of your marriage or long-term relationship. But there are certainly other ways to do that. And part of that is like, um, if you feel like you're not manly enough by whatever definition, well, go find people that you think are manly, or at least have the type of masculinity that you would also like to embody, right? And seek those people out, have those kinds of interactions and experiences, or maybe what you want is to have intellectual dialogue with people, and you could, because you feel like that would be a very manly thing to sort of, you know, seek wisdom and being able to speak intelligently about whatever topics you're interested in, and so you seek those things out by people who seem to be, you know, further along the timeline than you are.
Mm-hmm.
And those are challenging things, so it is challenge yourself in a way that makes you more conscious of what's going on in the world around you, and maybe in a way that compels you or that you're interested in, and sort of follow that. And again, what does that look like? But again, it's maybe I need to, one of the main things I tell a lot of my guys is go start working out. Like, how many guys don't work out that, I don't know why I don't have confidence for a girlfriend? It's like, you know, I'm not being, you know, this isn't even society. the research is well documented for a long time that the most important initial thing we look at is physical attractiveness. And so you don't get to skip that part where physical attraction is a part of finding a mate. And so that's something you have a whole lot of control over. So go do that. And then you meet a lot of guys who they've got that part down pat, but what they don't have is an understanding of frame control. And it's like, how do I, I'm like a Greek god over here, but every time my wife expresses some sort of emotional distress, I get so annoyed and I just don't even know what to do, and then I leave or uh, retaliate and you know cuss her out or whatever. And it's like, oh, that's not helpful for anybody. And
Right.
so you've got to figure those things out. So part of that is, what are you good at? And that's good to keep being good at that thing. But by default, what does that mean that you're not good at? And if we sit down with ourselves for 10 minutes, we'll start finding some things right away that we need to start doing that we haven't been doing.
Just for the record, I did not pay Ed to say that exercise is a good thing. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, Ed. That's I don't know if you know that about me. I actually
I
have
think you told me that,
I
yeah.
have a business that does that, but that's one of the things I often talk about with guys that are struggling is find something to help you process all that by stepping away from it. My process is if I have a stressful situation, whether it's with my wife or anything in life, I go pound some iron. A couple hours of that, get my mind off it, refreshes everything, then I can get back to dealing with whatever the challenge is. Something you were just saying was really striking home with me, and I want to pursue this a little bit, if we can. You talk about finding that role model, right? I think one of the issues that I've seen over the last, well, my lifetime, is the fatherlessness issue, right? Uh, you know, divorce is what it is. Somewhere around half of all kids, I don't remember the exact numbers now, but it's about half, grow up without their father in the home. Doesn't mean they don't have access elsewhere, but I've always argued this, and it goes both ways, mom or dad. The parents need to both be as involved as they possibly can, and but the dynamic right now is essentially dad gets every other weekend and the pizza date, as I call it, during the week, and that you can do a lot in that time, but you can't really do it enough, I think, and as boys in particular are growing up without that role model. I've talked with members in the black community where they say if you look at gang membership, virtually 100% of the members of gangs are from fatherlessness homes, right? How do we enable men to? Guess where I'm going with this is how do we enable men to find those healthy role models? Because there are some bad ones out there. Some would say I am. Okay. But one of the things that I do, one of the reasons I do what I do is to try and be a role model of some sort to guys, right? How do they find that person? Like, if you had someone coming into your office, they meet with you, and you could benefit from finding someone that could be a mentor, whatever phrase you want to use. How do they go about doing that within the context of a healthy dynamic?
So are you saying how does the person who needs that father figure, that
How
male
do they
role model,
find that
find
model?
someone?
Yes. What would you recommend
Yeah,
on that?
well, that's that's tough, but
Oh,
in true Ed Nissen form here, I'll start abstractly and high level.
perfect.
Is that I think you have to understand the significance and importance of it. Um, was it Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. And I think a lot of times when people, rely too much on this pseudo motivation and never really follow through with anything is this illusion of motivation as if it's going to do everything for them. And no, you have to really figure out why I need to do this. And so introspection, looking at your life and saying, okay, where am I, where am I going and how fast am I getting there?
Mm-hmm.
And it's either hell or heaven in some sense. And if we're honest with ourselves and we don't have what we need, we see that we're headed to hell pretty fast if we're not already in it. But so part of that is like you need to understand just how important it is for you to find a role model, right? And if you understand how important it is, you're going to start looking and you're going to figure out how to find it, right? And maybe that's listening to podcasts, you're getting online trying to find groups of men, maybe you're taking a more a conscious look at the men around you that's in your life that you haven't really considered even talking to before or engaging with very much, and you just start looking for, I won't say just because it's more complicated than that, but you certainly start looking for opportunities of who can I talk to. And it's almost kind of like, I imagine it's going to be like what we were talking about with women earlier. You're going to have this anxiety going up and trying to engage with men that way to build up the confidence to say, hey, can I hang out with you? Can you talk to me about this? Can you mentor me? Can you show me how to be a man? God forbid you have to ask someone that these days. But like, what if you did? What if you took responsibility to figure out what you need to do? It's like, okay, it sucks that you don't have a father figure,
Hmm.
and I empathize with that greatly. And personal story we'll get into another time maybe, but in a large sense, I lost my father when I was 20. And yeah, I got to have that until I was 20, but I could have gotten a lot more from him that I didn't.
Right.
What did I have to do? It's like, all right, realize that I didn't have enough of what I needed from my father. So let me find some men who do have what I want and see if I can integrate that and take that on and learn how to embody that. And sometimes that means just hanging out and trying to be friends with them. Sometimes it's like, hey, I don't have any experience with this thing and this type of challenge. And you seem to handle this stuff pretty well. What do you think I should do? How would you coach me on navigating this issue
Mm.
and whatever it is, the thing that I'm trying to accomplish and achieve here? And be willing to be an idiot. Like nobody wants to be the idiot, and understandably so. It's hard being the fool. But it's like be willing to ask the dumb questions. And people say, "Oh, there are no dumb questions." Yes, there are. Ask them anyway. It's like,
I
my
like you,
goodness.
Ed, because you know what, you're saying it as it should be, though, right? It's one of the there are dumb questions sometimes, but as guys, we can say that to each other. I wouldn't recommend saying that to your wife, but you may disagree with me on that. But
No, I agree. I agree.
as
There's one
guys,
thing we agree on. That's
yeah, there
good.
we go. But it kind of talks about. Well, let me rephrase it. One of the things that I often hear from single mothers is, I want to help my son be able to grow and develop properly. His father's not in the picture, and that first thing I would say to them is, you need to find him a man, for lack of a better term, whether it's a brother, an uncle, coach down the street, whatever, because, and I say it goes both ways, just to be clear for anyone listening. Women cannot teach boys everything they need to know to be a man, any more than the other way around, right? Fathers can't teach girls everything they need to know to be a healthy, productive woman. And again, it goes back to having that ability to work together. So, okay, if your son doesn't have a father in his life, find him someone. Because if you don't, he's going to go find his own, and then that's how they get into gangs and stuff like that. And that's why it's so important. And one of the things, and you touch on this in the book, one of the things that I think really that I see that boys that grow up without fathers struggle with is self control, right? Understanding what's appropriate. And when we were preparing for this, I kind of said to you that you've got to be able to communicate in a way or act in a way that allows you to regulate your emotions. You call it, I think, emotional self regulation, something like that. But
Yeah, emotional reliability. Yeah.
reliability, that's it, sorry.
Mhm.
But then there's this perception out there that men can't control themselves. They're going to go off the rails, blah, blah, because there are guys that do that. And unfortunately, that gets assigned to everyone. And then the other side of that you so often see is men get, I think, too much control over their emotions, right? They shut themselves off. I'm going to bury it deep. There isn't a video I put out where I talk about this that I don't have 100 guys comment. I just bury it, which is the worst thing they can do, in my opinion. But when you're talking about some of the concepts in the book and being able to self-regulate that and prevent themselves from doing things like, say, joining a gang or whatever, how can they begin that process? I guess is what I'm asking. Starting, obviously, we're talking as two older gentlemen, if I may. But when we're talking to, say, a 13, 15, 17-year-old boy, to someone listening to this who may have a son, mom or dad that has a son at that age, how can we help them to begin that process?
Well, lots of ways, and at the risk of getting on a soapbox here, and I will contain myself, is that
Oh, hell
a lot of
no.
these,
Get on that soapbox, my friend. I'm good with
yeah, I
it.
would say to a lot of these single moms, quit bad mouthing the father, especially in front of the kid.
Hmm.
Like what kind of impression are you reinforcing by doing that? And unfortunately, that happens a lot. Even women who think they don't do that, a lot of those still do. Um, Now, for the young men and even the 13, 14-year-old boys, I would say if your mom is bad mouthing your father whatsoever, or at least not speaking to them positively whatsoever, or at least just not saying anything if you can't say anything nice, um, going back to Bambi there a little bit, huh? Is
Mm.
that tell your mom to quit talking about your dad that way. Even in my own marriage, I tell my uh, daughter's 13, but for years I've been telling her, "Hey, look, if your mama's getting out of hand, sort of getting annoyed and raising her voice a little bit, you have every right to tell her, please don't raise your voice at me."
You are a brave man.
And it's worked. And now
Really?
they, if like sometimes they're more like, well, they're women and they have their hormones, so sometimes it gets the best of them. But fundamentally, what they'll do is that they're going to be assertive. And just the other day, she was like, "Mom, you don't have to raise your voice at me. I'm listening to you."
Good for
And
her.
it wasn't this disrespectful thing.
Right.
And my wife was like, "Oh, you're right, thank you." And so, you know, I try to encourage people of all ages, like to be assertive. I wish they taught assertiveness in school. Everybody's got their thing that they wish they taught in school, but that's my thing. But yeah, like speak up, like because if you if you're experiencing something that isn't right. I don't, like you could say kids don't really understand morality. No, that's where morality is born,
Hmm.
is in childhood and our development there. And give yourself some credit, even if no one else is teaching you that you have a voice. Like I'm here to tell you have a voice, and I think somebody, guys like yourself are certainly doing the same thing too. But really, it's take that on. Like, okay, um, I need this, and even if no one else in the world is encouraging me, I know that there's a voice in you that is encouraging. If you just listen, if you get still enough and quiet and you try to pay attention, you'll hear that voice. It's like, go get what you need no matter what.
Hmm.
And what I
Well,
mean by that is go get that male role model, go get the thing, go follow that impulse.
and also, I mean, the way I phrase it is be your own best ally. No one is going to care
Yeah.
more about you than you, period.
Yeah. No one's going to advocate for you better than you can.
Nobody. And that's where, if you're struggling with dealing with emotions and all that, address them within yourself first, is my opinion. And then, yeah, it may be that, all right, I have this issue, whatever it is. I've tried to handle it myself. I need help. Don't be afraid. Men do not reach out for help. You know this, right? I call it silo themselves off from society, and that leads to them unaliving themselves and a host of it. Alcoholism, the whole gamut. Whereas if we approached it more as, look, I'm flawed, and that's okay, and I need to one acknowledge that I'm flawed, and two, do what needs to be done both for myself or seeking out help to get there. That's the best way that men can be healthier in general, and then that translates directly to relationships. Because I have long believed if you are not in a quote unquote healthy space yourself, your relationship can never be there. I really believe that. I don't know where you stand on that, but
No, I
it's
agree.
if you don't have that ability to question yourself, hold yourself accountable, the big struggle I always throw out is women cannot do that. In generalizing here, they really struggle to hold themselves accountable, and they go off the rails. And then men look at that and go, the phrase I use, They're going to hate me for this one. Bitches be crazy, right? They're out cutting their hair right now over an election. I just cannot fathom that, right? Why would you do something like that? As a man, women understand it though, some of them, you know. But again, it speaks to us being able to say, we're human beings. It's okay that we have emotions. That's a big step. And I need to deal with those emotions. That's a lot of what you're talking about in the book, right? Is self-reflection, getting that journey going, and for lack of a better term, slaying that dragon, both within yourself and within the context of your relationship. I think that's kind of my takeaway from it.
Yeah, well, emotions, they didn't make it this far in the evolution of the human species for nothing because they were just a byproduct. No, they're there because they serve a deep fundamental purpose. Even the negative emotions, which, by the way, if we go depending on what model or theory of human emotions, there's just like six, and most of them are negative. And you think of the big two, sort of fear and sadness, and but those things are there. So what's Stoicism is this philosophy that's really gotten pretty big in the last several years. But man, there's such a huge misunderstanding of what Stoicism is. You get a lot of guys who, just stuff the feelings and say, no, I'm stoic. I'm like, no, you're not stoic. You're just suppressing your feelings because you're
Mm-hmm.
not man enough to deal with them. And you're creating this shadow side of yourself that's going to manifest in this destructive, probably monstrous way. And you're going to be like, I don't know what the hell happened and what came over me. It's like, yeah, you didn't talk about your emotions. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but it gets to the point. So yeah, there's that like, but there's the necessity of that, and so you might even, and I'm not a stoic expert by no means, but what you could say is stoicism or a way to regulate these emotions, to express them without letting them, or at least trying to create a cooperative relationship with those emotions, if you will. It's like if I feel angry, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't express my anger. It means I should regulate how I behave or act on that anger. So if my wife says something and it just catches me off guard for whatever reason, I had a stressful day and quite frankly, it just pisses me off, and I could just not say anything and push it down and then probably act out later and she's not going to know where the hell that came from. Or I could just retaliate and say something else stupid that, or I could say, I don't know why, but it really rubbed me the wrong way, and it doesn't even make sense, but I just got really mad just then. So I don't know if I need a minute or what.
Yeah, that's a great point because one of the things when I first met my wife, now we've been together since 2011, is I told her there will be times I will say to you, just step away. And that's my way of saying I need to collect my thoughts, right? And there are times we don't have, it's, I can count on one hand the number of big fights we've had in 11, 12, 13 years, whatever it is. But there have been times I've said, I'm going for a drive just so I can collect my thoughts because it might be that I'm angry. It might be that I'm hurt. Whatever the emotion was, I couldn't handle it at that time. And my being able to acknowledge that, and more importantly, her being able to acknowledge it, because a lot of times within, and it goes both ways, you're the inability to acknowledge the other person's emotions, it just escalates and escalates and escalates. And that's where, one thing I would say to people listening to this is understand when that happens, sometimes you have to step back. Doesn't mean you don't love the person. Because I've had relationships in the past where I've tried to get away from the conflict in that moment. You're just trying to avoid it. No, I need 10 minutes. Let me go to Dunkin' Donuts, get a coffee, collect my thoughts, come back, and we'll deal with it, right? Those relationships weren't healthy because of that. Now I have a healthy relationship because I can do that. And that's, again, it speaks to a lot of the concepts you're talking in the book is in a nutshell, working together, right? For us as men to understand what we need. This is another thing that men don't understand. Understand what we need to be happy, healthy, whatever, however you want to phrase it. And like when I was reading the book, there was a few times I'm like, "Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one." I told you I was writing notes as I was reading the book, right? Some of which are we've covered on this. We could spend the next 6 hours on this, and we're actually way over time anyway, and I don't care. But the big takeaway that I had from the book was it made me think about myself in different ways. And like I was writing back and forth with you, I really enjoyed it because of that, right? You challenged me to think. And I'm in a good place right now, right? I've got a great relationship. My life is as good as it can be. I honestly believe that, right? But you still were able to challenge me, my friend. And that, if nothing else, is the best whatever you want to call it, endorsement of the book that I can give is it makes you challenge yourself as a man. And I would argue also women need to read this book to
I've
get.
actually had several women read
Oh,
this book
what do they
and
say, Ed?
love it. They love it.
Really?
And one of the reasons I found out, that I've learned about the reason they love it because it helps them get a better idea on what they need to elicit from their husband.
Mm. I could see exactly why that would be, right? It that's what kind of what I was going to say is it will help them to understand the man better. So
Yeah.
again, I would encourage women to go read that. I would encourage mothers, especially single mothers, sorry ladies, to read this book so that you have a better understanding of what your son is dealing with now but will be in the future and help him that way. Those are the things. But let me ask you this. What is your hope or what is your main takeaway that you would want your readers to get from the book?
Uh, I would say, the philosophy that of mine that drove the book on a fundamental level is the philosophy that says it's probably me. And if it happens to be the case that it is her and I'm struggling to get through, it's probably me. So it's like that personal responsibility. It's like I can figure it out. I have everything it takes to figure it out. And I'm going to assume that it's reconcilable. Whatever differences or incompatibility that we have, I'm going to assume that it can be reconciled. It's just a matter of figuring out what to do and how to do it. And maybe I figure those things out because I figure out why I need to do it. I'm going to look at the significance of it. But fundamentally, it's whatever challenge or problem I'm having and frustration, I'm going to say it's probably me. I'm going to take a look at that first. When I'm doing that, sometimes I'm going to realize, oh, it is her. Maybe she's not taking responsibility for something. Then I have to try to convince her that she needs to take responsibility for that. And if I'm not doing a good job of convincing her that she needs to take responsibility for that, it's probably me, and I need to figure out how to do that. Um, and if I do that, then there's other things. If I'm persistent and I'm practicing the four pillars of assertiveness, character, frame, and confidence, and all of those things, but if I'm oriented towards this way that this can be reconciled, I'm going to redeem the goodness that lies in purgatory in this single conflict in the marriage as a whole or whatever it is. I'm going to slay this dragon. I'm going to become the hero that I need, that she needs, that this marriage needs. And whatever that dragon is, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to find it because I'm going to know I found it because it's going to be the thing that I fear the most, that annoys me the most, that frustrates me the most. And I'm going to slay the dragon and free the captive beauty that's waiting for me to do that.
So as we're getting ready to wrap things up, to someone that's listening to this, right? We're a couple hours in now, and to a man that's listening to this, let's say he's having some struggles with his relationship. What would you say should be the first couple of things? Well, one is go by the book, but after that, and read it. But after that, what would be the first couple of things you would say to that man should be his first steps towards trying to repair it? Or however you want to phrase the relationship.
Take a look at how much personal responsibility he's taking.
Okay.
And if he's honest with himself whatsoever, he's going to find out real quick the personal responsibility that he's been abdicating. And I'll tell you that wherever you've been abdicating responsibility, you're going to find a whole lot of opportunity.
In other words, accountability rears its ugly head yet again. Self accountability.
Damn responsibility.
Damn it. It comes around. All right, we do have to wrap things up. How can people get the book, Ed?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. Song of the Hero. I'm going to pick at you a little bit. You said Song for the Hero. I guess you could say that,
Oh,
but Song of the Hero.
I did pre-warn
And
you.
fair enough, fair enough. It's you do this a lot, so it's I don't always get my clients' names, down pat the first time I see them. So don't I'm not judging, at least not too hard. But yeah, so Amazon is going to be your best place. I think you can get them on Barnes and Noble too. But yeah, I mean I know most people get them on Amazon, and I think it.
I miss Barnes and Noble. I used to love going around Barnes and Nobles, and I'll put links to the Amazon down below so people can just go down in the show notes, click it, and get right to it. Do you have social media, Ed? I didn't ask you on that. Do you have any social medias you want to share with the audience if someone wanted to reach out?
Yeah, primarily Instagram. It looks like my internet's
Yeah, there goes
unstable
your
here, but
internet
yeah,
again.
it's so Ed.Nissen on Instagram is typically where that is. You could find me Ed Nissen on YouTube as well. I'm starting to build that channel up, and but yeah, primarily for now, either Ed.Nissen at on Instagram or ednissen.com on the World Wide Web.
And I will again put links to both of those down below so you can go do that. And I would encourage you, my friend, to get out on YouTube and start talking about this stuff and the concepts in the book because you could help a lot of people, but men in particular. Because as I said, I don't want to make it like I'm gushing over the book, but this is a really, really productive book for men and honestly women to read. And takes I always say to people when you're reading a book and you're trying to, you know, adapt it into your life, pick one or two nuggets that really work for you and then go from there. You don't have to digest the whole book and say, I'm going to do everything in it right now. It's not going to work. Find that one or two. Say it goes back to my fitness, right? If you're going to make a change to your diet, everybody goes right to, I'm going to cut everything out. No, cut back on this or if you have a Snickers bar for dinner every night, maybe change that to some little changes and then adapt to them. And that's where I encourage you, if you can get on social media and talk about that stuff, you could dramatically change lives because you are. I have to say this: you're amazing. And I'm not saying that because you're right in front of me on the screen. I truly, truly enjoyed reading that book and took a lot from it. And I'm fairly comfortable with who I am, but like I said earlier, damn it, you challenged me, my friend, and you've got.
I appreciate all those forms of encouragement, and I've initiated the plan for YouTube and making more videos and things like that. So there's definitely some things in the work. And obviously, I appreciate the encouragement with the book. I've certainly tried to write it in a way to where if you do just want the practical sort of simplified things, you could read through it and maybe you slog through some of the technical because it does get pretty technical in a lot of places there. But you can kind of pick it up and don't worry too much about trying to retain all of it. So if you get to a part where it's just dense and it's just not really what you're interested in, keep reading. You'll get what you need out of it. But also, a lot of us guys really like the really deep dives and technical
Mhm.
content and really get into some depth of it. And so I really try to focus more on making that happen too. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, I would encourage people to do what I did. If you're reading through it and you have some questions, jot them down, even if you're doing it for yourself. And I was doing that as I was reading through the book. I had a little. I tend to do that with these type of books. Is I put a little notepad and I jot notes down, and because there might be something that I'm reading and maybe I don't even understand it, but if I write it down and come back later, do more research and stuff like that, you're only going to benefit yourself by doing that. And
And I'm
that's
sure you can attest that if you did have some thoughts and took some notes early on in the book, when you keep reading,
oh,
those
abs
questions are usually going to be answered for you. It's like,
more
okay,
more than once.
let's connect the dots
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
like when you were going through the pillars, right? I'm like, oh, all right. And then at the end, I was like, oh, I get it. There was a couple times that happened. So yeah, absolutely. Ed, any final thought that you want to share with the audience?
Well, I think, it's we talked about a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of veer off and take a deep dive into a few of these things, But I will say I go back to sort of the meaning crisis here, and yeah, there's this specialty, so to speak, of male psychological development in the context of relationships. But fundamentally, if you really look at what's happening here, there's the real pandemic I've said for years now is it's the lack of meaning and purpose. And it's like if you start engaging with these challenges in at least a way that's different than what you've been doing, and maybe you get some of these ideas from my book and my work, but nonetheless, you do something different and you take on these challenges. What you're going to find is, well, what that is, you're taking responsibility for that challenge, but immediately and sustainably, you're going to begin to find more and more meaning in that, and so many things are going to be illuminated for you. So, it's again cliche, but it's so true. It's like trust the process. And worst case, and I hate putting it this way, but prove me wrong. Prove yourself wrong that this is either going to work or not work. You won't know until you put yourself in and you're all in with it and try it out. What have you got to lose if you're even considering I need to do something different because things aren't uh, as good as they could be, or maybe they're just outright terrible. I mean, at this point, it's like your best thinking got you here, so why don't you try something else? And for goodness sake, be a little more open-minded and willing, and last but not least, be courageous.
And in a nutshell, I would narrow it down to the only true way to fail is to not try. So if you're struggling with something, do something.
Yeah,
Something will always triumph nothing. I truly believe that. And
yeah. Go read "Man in the Arena" by Roosevelt, and that'll expound on that quite nicely.
it's, again, it's, you've got to put yourself first. That's the ultimate thing on it. Ed, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for writing the book, first of all, because like I said, I got a lot out of it. And I truly appreciate you taking a couple hours out of your busy schedule to come on and talk with the audience, share some thoughts. There's so much that we didn't cover because there's only so much time that we have. And I encourage people to go read the book. You will benefit from it. And Ed, thank you for writing it and for coming on. I truly appreciate it.
Man, it's an honor to have written that. It's an honor and privilege to be on here. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it. It's been very meaningful, and I had a lot of fun.
It was fun. And you got me going again. So good job on that. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, you know the drill. Thumbs up, right? Give me that like. It helps get the word out to more and more as we speak about men's and boys issues. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I am live every Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 Eastern with my partner Squirrely Girl, who's Lindsay, and we talk about men's and boys issues. We're going to be expanding on that podcast as well. Who knows? Ed doesn't know this yet, but down the road, I'm going to have him on with Lindsay and I at some point if he's willing. And subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so when we do go live, you see that. And again, remember that we're in this together, right? As men and as women, if you're a woman watching this, we're in this together. And I hope everyone remembers that in these times where everything's so divisive, the more that we stand together and work together, the better we all are. So I'll leave you with that final thought and catch you next time on Men Need to Be Heard.